import.
The early hours once marked the busiest time at the border. Engines rumbling, trailers lined for inspection, and the air filled with the rhythm of commerce that carried small towns on its back. Today, the silence cuts deeper than any noise. Loaded trucks wait with nowhere to go, produce wilts under the sun, and farmers see years of work slipping through their hands. What began as a dispute on paper now bleeds into fields and communities, leaving livelihoods on edge. Canada has stepped aside, Mexico is seizing ground, and the struggle has turned into something far larger than trade. How long before the system gives way completely? And what will be left when the dust finally settles? The Canadian Food Inspection Agency framed its ruling in the precise terms of regulation, citing pesticide residues and recurring concerns about quality. Officially, it looked like a routine act of oversight, the sort of policy buried in technical language that rarely stirs much debate. Yet behind the formality was a calculated decision that had little to do with food safety. It was a deliberate redirection of agricultural power across North America, a market shift that caught thousands of American farmers off guard. Within 48 hours, border crossings that once carried the pulse of trade fell silent. Nearly 150 truckloads of California tomatoes sat idle at the Peace Bridge, denied entry into Canada. Another 89 shipments stalled at the Ambassador Bridge, refrigeration units buzzing as their value withered with every passing hour. These were not abstract numbers on a government report. They reflected the annual flow of $340 million, revenue that supported 2,400 American farming families. That money was the foundation for mortgages, school funding, rural hospitals, and the fragile economies of small towns. With one ruling, the lifeline had been cut. The timing made the blow even more painful. Only weeks earlier, Canada had finalized agreements worth $180 million with greenhouse growers in British Columbia and Ontario. Domestic facilities, fast-tracked and fully funded, were built to replace nearly the exact volume of tomatoes once sourced from California. The message was unmistakable. American supply was no longer essential. Tom Richardson, a farmer outside Fresno who had spent more than 3 decades in the business, summed it up plainly. The problem was not the quality of the crop. The problem was that Canada had already secured an alternative. That single step marked the first domino in a larger retreat from American agriculture. As farmers in California tried to absorb the shock, another transformation was taking shape 2,000 miles south. Mexico, rather than watching the fallout, seized the opening to advance on the global stage. What unfolded was not an ordinary expansion. It was a $12 billion surge of investment orchestrated by European agribusiness giants, looking for reliability, efficiency, and new partners they could depend on for decades to come. Sinaloa, Sonora, and Baja California became the front lines of that transformation. Of the billions invested, more than 7 went directly into advanced greenhouses and hydroponic operations that guaranteed steady production through every season, using nearly 40% less water than the traditional methods dominating U.S. farms. Another $3 billion strengthened the backbone of logistics, financing new ports, highways, and storage facilities designed for seamless international delivery. The rest flowed into education, training, and research, creating a skilled workforce and a culture of innovation that gave Mexico an advantage. American agriculture had been slowly losing. What stunned many was the speed. Agricultural revolutions usually take decades, but Mexico's new partners built on existing strengths and scaled them at an astonishing pace. Within 8 months, premium Mexican tomatoes were already appearing on European shelves at prices nearly a quarter lower than American exports. Maria Elena Vasquez, an economist at the University of Guadalajara, explained the significance with clarity. At the very moment U.S. agriculture was losing trust abroad, Mexico presented itself as a stable and cheaper supplier. European buyers, long frustrated by American delays, turned south without hesitation. That shift exposed the vulnerability of America's role in global food markets. The effects were not limited to export contracts or trade statistics. In California's farming towns, the fallout took a human toll. Watsonville became a stark example. The processing plant that once employed hundreds now sat dark. Trucking firms that built their business hauling produce across the border cut down to skeleton crews. Fertilizer dealers, repair shops, and even the diners where drivers stopped for meals struggled to keep doors open. Economists describe the process as the multiplier effect. For every dollar lost at the farm gate, nearly 2 disappear across the community. Locals describe it more bluntly: ruin. In counties anchored by farming, unemployment surged more than 30%. Processing facilities operated at half capacity. Families who had lived on the land for generations began leaving in search of stability. The losses extended beyond economics. Schools in farming regions saw sharp declines in enrollment, forcing districts to shut programs and consolidate. In Delano, Superintendent Janet Morrison described the pain of watching long-standing families move away. Each departure meant fewer students, less funding, and shrinking resources. Hospitals followed the same path. Already under strain, rural medical centers reduced services as patient counts fell and unpaid bills piled up. Property values across California's farming belt dropped nearly 20% in half a year, pulling entire communities downward with them. What began as a tomato dispute revealed itself as part of a broader contest for agricultural dominance. Food was no longer treated as a commodity alone. It had become an instrument of strategy, tied to national security and global influence. The European Union, scarred by its reliance on Russian energy, had learned the cost of depending too heavily on a single supplier. When Mexico offered a stable partner in agriculture while American exports faltered, Europeans recognized more than a trade deal. They saw resilience and security. Analysts in Brussels put it plainly: America built its dominance on consistency and trust. Once those qualities were questioned, alternatives became appealing. Canada's rejection was about more than pesticide standards. It was a calculated decision to reduce exposure to an unreliable source. Mexico's rise was about more than filling a gap in tomatoes. It was about reshaping food supply chains that had stood unchanged for decades. The danger lies in what happens next. If a setback of this scale can happen in tomatoes, what will follow in wheat, soy, or corn? These are crops that feed not only the country but the world, and the vulnerabilities are now visible to everyone watching. Technology has widened the gap even further. Mexico's new facilities are not only larger, but smarter. Greenhouses are wired with sensors that track soil, light, and water in real time. Automated systems make adjustments on their own, while predictive models forecast market demand weeks ahead. Harvests are planned with a level of precision traditional farming cannot match. The efficiency gains are undeniable. American tomato growers require more than 3,000 gallons of water to produce a single ton of crop. Mexico's hydroponic systems do the same with under 2,000. Automation cuts labor costs nearly in half. Crops are shielded from the climate risks that can wipe out entire seasons in the United States. American universities once led this field, but years of underfunding and slow approval processes have stalled progress. In contrast, European firms and Chinese technology companies have brought their best systems directly into Mexico's fields. The result is a widening technology divide that has left American agriculture falling behind. Dr. Patricia Williams, who left a research role in California for work in Europe, described the frustration. The breakthroughs exist, she said, but in the U.S., bureaucracy and outdated systems block adoption. South of the border, the same advances are already reshaping farming. What once drove American leadership is now fueling Mexico's rise. Even distribution has turned into a liability. Infrastructure built for a world that demanded American produce now feels oversized and outdated. Processing plants, rail lines, and trucking fleets were designed for volumes that no longer exist. Costs per shipment rise as facilities run under capacity, making exports even less competitive. Trucking companies specializing in pioneer cross-border trade report business losses of more than 60%. Rail lines meant for heavy agricultural traffic now sit underused, while maintenance costs remain high. Supermarkets, sensitive to supply and consumer demand, have adapted quickly. Shelves that once carried California-grown produce now display Mexican alternatives. Retailers follow supply that is steady and affordable. And right now, that stability is found south of the border. Regional grocery chains face constant pressure from customers who expect quality at the best price, and that pressure accelerates the transition. Moreover, American tomato farmers are learning how fragile decades of market ties can be when a single decision reshapes the future of an entire industry. For generations, families built their livelihoods on reliable cross-border trade, often borrowing against the certainty that each year's harvest would be sold. That certainty collapsed almost overnight. Agricultural finance was always structured on predictability. Banks issued loans on the assumption of stable markets, and farmers managed their operations within those dependable cycles. When Canada closed its doors to American tomatoes, those assumptions vanished. The Federal Reserve's Agricultural Lending Survey reveals how far the damage has gone. Loan delinquencies in tomato-producing regions have jumped 78% since the ban, and bankruptcy filings have climbed 45% in only 8 months. These figures fail to capture the full scale, since many smaller farmers who cannot afford legal costs simply walk away, leaving behind land that carried their family history. Banks that once considered farming loans a safe bet now demand collateral most families cannot provide, cutting off the last lifeline for survival. The halted tomato trucks at border crossings tell a much larger story. Canada's decision has revealed how fragile American agricultural power has become. The losses are staggering. $340 million in export revenue gone, more than 24,000 farming families on the brink, agricultural unemployment rising 34%, loan delinquencies up 78%, and bankruptcies climbing 45%. But the real tragedy lies beyond statistics. Families are abandoning land that carried their legacy. Skilled workers are leaving for opportunities elsewhere. That's all for today. Hit like and subscribe, and see you in the next one.